Hello and welcome today to the Air at Cosmos studio, where we are joined by Jean-Pierre Loubet. Jean-Pierre, hello. Hello, Xavier. You are a teacher in military history and defense studies, right? That's right. And you have written several absolutely brilliant articles. I'll put the links in the comments of this video, especially for questions about deterrence and the credibility of French nuclear deterrence. My first question related to current events is that we're in a period of rearmament and need to be credible. Can we separate our credibility, our rearmament in the field of deterrence, from ultimately having a more conventional army?
No, the two are complementary. So we can see it. Historically, it's even the textbook case from the beginning of the Cold War. The Americans at the end of World War II, when the Cold War began, invented the concept of massive retaliation. In fact, a conventional army was no longer needed. If the communist bloc became aggressive, devastating the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics with nuclear weapons would suffice. The Korean War demonstrated that conventional weapons were necessary to halt an enemy offensive, disproving the notion that it was possible without them. Even during the Korean War, MacArthur was not allowed to use nuclear weapons.
Tactical ones. In Manchuria?
So we need conventional weapons as much as nuclear ones, including to be credible. Besides, if we claim to have a nuclear deterrent that would be used immediately, we're not credible, no one would believe us. Regarding nuclear war, credibility and the psychological aspect,
the rhetoric is fundamental. That's the problem with the Russians, who have threatened to use nuclear weapons annually for 15 years. Ultimately, no one believes them anymore. Exactly. But it also means that France, when it rearms, when it relaunches its industry, there is a major program to modernize its nuclear arsenal. But in the end, from what point are we considered credible? Today, it feels like we could wipe out Russia once, but Russia could wipe us out 500 times. Very well. Is that enough to be credible today against Russia?
There are 2 points to make. First, France's strike capability was inherited from the Cold War. That was the concept that General de Gaulle wanted. De Gaulle said that we had to be able to tear off an arm from the Soviets. And actually, the idea was that we had to inflict on Russia, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics at the time, damage comparable to what we represented as potential. Well, basically, we had to kill 50 million Russians. Is that it, actually? That's the first point. Second point. Actually, the problem is that it's not us who decide if we're a deterrent. It's Russia that has to be scared enough of us, eventually, to see if they are deterred themselves. And when I talk about Russia, it could be others too.
Potential adversaries.
The main concerns are China and North Korea. It's impossible to know what potential adversaries are thinking. So we can actually rely on a level of sufficiency, which has always been the French concept. So actually destroying the equivalent of the French potential as part of French deterrence seems reasonable. If France were ever to take charge of the defense of the entire European continent, then maybe it would be necessary to step up the game. Because claiming to defend 500 million Europeans, by only being able to have a few missiles, a few dozen nuclear warheads, or a few hundred, because, in addition, our submarines certainly couldn't all fire at the same time, that might not be enough.
However, so mass matters, and 300 nuclear warheads might be enough for the national theater. But not necessarily if we are in the extension, as recently expressed by the president. That's right, exactly. Above all, we must not forget, actually, out of the 300
nuclear warheads, we always assume that a portion will never be used. Out of the 3 sets of missiles, it's important to remember that France has 4 submarines, but only 3 sets of missiles. Among the 3 missile sets, there is at least 1 submarine docked in Brest that could potentially be destroyed in a surprise attack. We will always have just 1 or 2 submarines capable of firing. Many Rafales could also be destroyed on the ground in a surprise attack. In reality, our firing capability consists of 80 nuclear warheads launched by a submarine and possibly a few Rafales.
No more. There, you mentioned an important point. It's a surprise attack. I want to say that we are 100% sovereign over our nuclear weapons, over the delivery systems, meaning the nuclear submarines. With the Rafale, we can do everything on our own. But are we sovereign over the entire spectrum of deterrence, meaning also our ability to see a strike coming? No, and that's strange.
Ever since the history, or rather the origin of French nuclear deterrence, but we're missing a crucial component. Detecting an enemy launch, early warning, or advanced warning as it's sometimes called, depends on the translation, particularly from English. The crucial component we lack is the ability to reliably detect a Russian attack. Or, to go back to what you were saying earlier, Chinese or coming from anywhere else, we're dependent on the Americans. And so, well, the Americans have an excellent system, it's multi-layered, it's perfect. The multi-layered nature is crucial, as such a sophisticated system invariably has bugs. In 1983, it wasn't discussed much, as we recall. But the Soviet warning system had a bug, and it detected the launch of 5 American missiles heading toward the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Fortunately, the colonel on duty said, "It's not possible, it's a bug, I won't alert the Soviet authorities." Consequently, he stopped his country from retaliating, saving world peace. Indeed, a multi-layered system is needed, which we currently lack.
And it's very, very expensive anyway, when we talk about multi-layered systems. I think I remember that there were tests in France with a kind of small satellite for detecting launches, actually they're heat detectors.
There wasn't any follow-up. No. So, actually, about 15 years ago, we launched 2 experimental spirally satellites. We have an over-the-horizon radar, also experimental, Nostradamus, but that's not enough, actually. We would need at least several satellites in geostationary orbit, especially to cover the entire Eurasian bloc. We would require multiple satellites in elliptical orbit and several layers of radars, including long-range ones. So it's actually a colossal system, and on top of that it has to be 360 degrees, including over water. That's right, over water. We must not forget that if the Russians launch fractional orbital bombardment system are actually warheads that are put into orbit that go around the Earth before coming to hit us. These warheads can actually come from the south. So indeed, we're making a 360-degree system.
The Burevestnik missile, announced in 2018, has nuclear propulsion and emits radioactivity. And it also has a theoretically unlimited range, exactly, without even needing to go into space.
The Russians are struggling with development issues and can't get it to function properly. However, it would pose an additional threat if successful.
It exploded on the ground several times. The development is going badly, but nevertheless, they announced it. That's right, so since they're making announcements, maybe they'll manage to pull it off. So we still need to be able to see it coming, absolutely. Double problem. It's expensive, as we said, the United States might want to with. Trump just announced a program called Golden Dome, $500 billion, $600 billion. So without going to those extremes, and a defense, because it's also about interception. Can France itself develop, or are there European projects to try to set up these sensors?
France, that's clear based on the numbers you mentioned. A defense budget of around 40 billion is impossible for us in the foreseeable future compared to other countries. So the solution could only be European. There is not yet a real European early warning program. But if one day we decided to launch such a program, it could only be on a continental scale.
I noticed some small programs are beginning to progress, which we can
hope so. Yes, especially in the case of missile defense.
The two will be correlated. If we look at the capability, as we mentioned, to extend the French nuclear umbrella, the President of the Republic said that French nuclear weapons could potentially be stationed in foreign countries. For example, we think of Poland, with the costs covered by Poland. But in that context, would it also be necessary to change the type of nuclear weapons we have? Should we continue to have only strategic weapons with SMPA missiles at 300 kilotons? Should we follow the American example with the B-61 bombs and develop a tactical battlefield nuclear weapon? So in my opinion, the
B-61s, they are obsolete. I would say, if really there are American or European bombers that could get through Russian defenses, striking or dropping a B-61 somewhere are more political weapons than operational ones. So making a French or European B-61 seems totally obsolete to me. So the principle of the ASMP, or soon the ASN-4G, I think, is really essential. Afterwards, as is generally the case with all contemporary warheads, you can adjust the yield. An ASMPA with a yield of 300 kilotons is immense, equivalent to 20 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. So if you can adjust the yield, that's important, especially with the French concept of the ultimate warning. If you can even just do a warning shot as a first shot, for example. French submarines generally carry an empty missile, which allows them to fire a warning shot, to launch a ballistic missile that can be detected by Russian radars. Since they have a complete detection system, which would alert them at the same time saying, be careful, it's a blank shot. It's a final warning before moving on to a first warning shot, possibly nuclear and possibly low yield. In fact, that's correct.
So does it seem relevant, if we stick to this approach, to have nuclear Scalp missiles with an explosive capacity that's not 300 kilotons, but 10? Something that could be used in a theater of operations to defend Lithuania? This kind of thing is being considered?
That would seem like the best solution to me. It's not being considered yet, actually, because in any case, there are major decisions to be made. We're at a crossroads right now. The future of the American guarantee remains uncertain, with many unknowns still in play. But if we are indeed heading toward that scenario, that would be the necessary approach.
So extending the doctrine and nuclear protection of Europe by France implies increasing the number of warheads in those categories. And more simply, deterrence and also use.
Yes, 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 indeed use. And then also I would say the mass and the power of the weapons, actually. During the Cold War, French nuclear warheads were thermonuclear as they are today, but no longer exceeded 1 megaton in yield. In the 1980s, the warheads on the submarines at the Albion Plateau were 1.2 megatons. French nuclear warheads today are approximately 100 kilotons in magnitude. Russian warheads range from 100 to 800 kilotons, with some larger ones still in existence, although they've been reduced. Indeed, when they make MIRVed missiles like ours, meaning missiles with multiple nuclear warheads on board, they use smaller warheads. Indeed, at
100 kilotons, 10 warheads instead of one megaton warhead.
Warheads of
100 kilos, and they're going to hit 10 different targets. And by the way,
you do more damage with several small nuclear warheads than with just one, which ultimately doesn't cause much extra damage.
decisions are made only at the political level, and in this case, it must be made at the European level in a coordinated way. Our allies, and I'm thinking of
The Polish,
are asking very clearly, do we get the impression in any case that the Americans could push us to do it, especially if Trump lets you disengage from Europe?
ultimately, when we look at, for example, the debates currently happening in NATO, and even the relationships within NATO, the Americans are starting to hint at it. Even the position of the alliance's supreme commander, if we want it, maybe not immediately, as there are still bases in Europe that greatly interest them. Ramstein and all that, it's hard to imagine them giving up Ramstein so quickly. I saw General Richoux not long ago, who was speaking along those lines, actually, just to say, well, no, there are limits that they won't cross. But in the end, they themselves seem to be pushing us to take over after all. So if the Americans do that, we'll have to make a decision among Europeans indeed. And the scenario you mentioned, yes, that's the one we'll have to follow at that point. But culturally, it's going to be a monumental upheaval. It's
Absolutely strategic.
that we can't grasp in the mindset of many Europeans. Denmark's continued commitment to the F-35, despite its issues, demonstrates the programme's significance. And Greenland, which is threatened by Trump, so even in that situation, they still can't make a decision. And honestly, we don't realize how lucky we've been. We've criticized NATO for decades, but NATO was a guarantee, an all-risk insurance in the end, with an exceptional value for money. Giving up on that model, objectively.
There's reason to hesitate. And now today, is it? So in this doctrine, obviously, once again, we stick to a deterrence that is 100% national, 100% sovereign, with technologies that remain 100% under France's control. With a double key. That means basically France would replace the United States in countries that have the Rafale on their soil. In a way, yes. Anyway, nuclear
Can only be national. De Gaulle explained it, Gallo explained it, in fact all the French theorists of the weapon have explained it. Indeed, as you mentioned, we can extend our nuclear umbrella to Europe, taking over from the Americans, including the delivery systems. The decision-making should be national, which indeed implies trust in France, in French policy. That's another level, that too. Especially in Eastern Europe, you have to look at the history. The Poles indeed currently seem very favorable to an extension of this French guarantee. Historically, before World War II, we promised to defend Eastern Europe, but failed to do so. So there is also the weight of the past, which is coming back to the surface. Even the Russians, will they consider a French deterrent force credible? This ties back to your earlier point. What matters regarding the damage we can inflict on them is the reliability of the French decision. That's precisely what it is. Indeed, we must be adequately clear on these points.
put pressure on others. So does extending this deterrence mean it's a dilution of the French deterrence? With less credibility in each of the areas we defend? Or is it really a show of strength since we're credible in our ability and willingness to use it if our ally is attacked?
Yes, it's a show of strength. It's a show of strength. That's why, indeed, we would certainly need to start producing more nuclear warheads again and bring new delivery systems into service. The main issue is credibility. And at that level, it means, indeed, in terms of political discourse and also in terms of budgetary measures. It's very difficult in the current context where all budgets are restricted because the contracts...
The economy has escalated.
That's right, exactly. But indeed, that's still
What we should be striving for. And then, when we saw a few months ago, a little over a year ago, that some nuclear power plants started producing tritium again. Things we don't need unless we're making warheads. Maybe these are the first signs that we weren't supposed to see, but that still leaked out. Yeah, maybe. By the way, I don't know if the leak was intentional or not, but actually that's the kind of clue that points in that direction. You're absolutely right. We'll see in a few years if it actually happens anyway. We have a limited amount of uranium or plutonium, though we're unsure which one France has. In any case, we need to produce more.
Tritium in particular. Indeed, in any case, even if we don't make new warheads, we still have to produce them regularly. The material has a short half-life of 12 years, requiring regular replacement, especially for French nuclear warheads. Well, not the fissile material itself, but the tritium indeed degrades very quickly, and it's also very expensive. So that's something that constantly needs to be renewed?
The material. So it's not necessarily a symbol or a sign that we're producing more or preparing for it. It could be both, okay? Jean-Pierre, Xavier, thank you very much. We hope that any increase in our power will serve as a sufficient deterrent to avoid its use. Absolutely, that's the principle of deterrence. And the important thing is that it wouldn't be us, the French, who would pay for this extension of deterrence, but our allies who would benefit from it and finance it with us. It would be a burden to share with everyone. Thank you, Xavier. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon at the Arikosmos studio.